You've probably heard of 1984. Even if you haven't read it, you know it. Big Brother's always watching. Thoughtcrime. A world where the truth can be rewritten. It's one of the most powerful warnings about authoritarianism ever written. A work so original that it changed how we talk about power itself. But there's a problem. It might not be as original as we think. I actually read We before I ever read Orwell, which is backwards. But sometimes, backwards can still lead forward, toward the truth. Because most of us read Animal Farm in school. And if we read Orwell at all, it's usually 1984. I hadn't. Not yet. And when I finally did, parts of it felt familiar. Decades before Orwell, a Russian writer named Yevgeny Zamyatin imagined a world where people lived in glass houses, where the state watched everything, where individuality was treated like a disease. The book was called We, and almost nobody talks about it. Now here's where it gets interesting. George Orwell had read it. He reviewed it. He knew exactly what it was. So what do we call this? In the early 1920s, not long after the Russian Revolution, a Russian writer named Yevgeny Zamyatin sat down to imagine the future. A former Bolshevik who had become the Soviet Union's first dissident. What he came up with wasn't hopeful. In We, the world is perfectly ordered, efficient, controlled. People don't have names. They have numbers. They live in glass apartments, so they can be watched at all times. Privacy is a scheduled privilege. The only time you can lower the blinds is for your assigned sexual hour. Their days are planned down to the minute. Even love is regulated. And imagination? That's a sickness. Something to be cured by a great operation that removes the brain's creative center. The main character, D503, doesn't even realize anything is wrong. Not at first. Until he meets I330, a woman who smokes, drinks, and dreams of rebellion. She shows him something different. And that's where the one state begins to crack. These weren't just ideas. They were warnings. Patterns Zamyatin saw emerging in the new Soviet state. And for that, he was silenced. We became the first novel officially banned by the Soviet censorship board, Glavlit. It had to be smuggled out and published abroad. The first great warning about surveillance was almost erased. And yet, the ideas traveled. They reached a writer who would turn them into one of the most famous novels ever written. George Orwell. When 1984 was published in 1949, it didn't just land. It hit. The timing mattered. The world had just survived a global war, and Orwell's vision of the future felt clearer, more direct, and more real. But Orwell had read We. He reviewed it in 1946. He pointed out the similarities himself. The all-seeing ruler, the benefactor, Big Brother, the enforcers, the guardians, thought police. Even the hidden space where lovers meet, away from the system. So what do we call this? There's a famous line from T.S. Eliot. Immature poets imitate. Mature poets steal. Not copy. Steal. And transform. Orwell took Zamyatin's jagged mathematical nightmare and translated it into something colder, simpler, and harder to ignore. He took an underground classic and turned it into a global warning. In music, we call this a sample, an interpolation. Think about how Jay-Z took the DNA of the Notorious B.I.G. and refined it into something broader. He wasn't biting, he was building. But in literature, we're obsessed with originality. And that difference matters, because it decides who gets remembered and who becomes a footnote. Today we call our surveillance state Orwellian. But if that smuggled manuscript had never made it out, if Orwell never encountered we might be using a different word. Zamyatin-esque. Same warning, different ghost. So if we came first and 1984 came after, why don't we talk about Yevgeny Zamyatin the same way we talk about George Orwell? Why did one become required reading and the other almost disappeared? Part of it is simple. Zamyatin wrote "We" inside the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union didn't just censor ideas, it erased them. His book was banned by Glavlit. He couldn't publish, couldn't distribute, couldn't defend his own work. At one point, he wrote directly to Joseph Stalin, asking permission to leave the country. Not to promote his book, just to survive. And eventually, he did leave. But by then, the damage was done. Because timing matters. "We" was written in the early 1920s, but most English readers didn't see it until decades later, after 1984 was already famous. So to the world, it didn't look like a blueprint, it looked like a footnote. And then there's language. Zamyatin's writing is dense, mathematical, almost abstract. Orwell, clear, direct, surgical. He didn't just describe oppression, he named it. Big Brother, thought police, doublethink, words that stick, words that travel. But there's something deeper than that. Something we don't talk about enough. Power decides what survives. Orwell was writing in the West. His work could be printed, distributed, and taught. And during the Cold War, his message was useful. A warning about totalitarianism aimed directly at the Soviet Union, which meant governments, schools, publishers, they amplified it. They made sure it was seen. Zamyatin, he was the warning from inside the system. And systems like that don't preserve their critics. They bury them. So this isn't just about two books. It's about how culture works, how ideas move, how some voices get lifted and others get lost, in translation or in silence. Because history doesn't just remember what was said, it remembers what was allowed to be heard. And sometimes, the most important ideas are the ones that almost didn't make it out at all. So let's put them next to each other. Not as accusations, but as ideas. In "We", people live in glass houses. Everything is visible. Nothing is private. In 1984, the telescreen is always watching. Different technology, same idea. In "We", people don't have names. They have numbers. In 1984, identity is stripped away by the party. Different system, same result. In "We", imagination is treated like a disease, something to be cured. In 1984, independent thought becomes Thoughtcrime. Different language, same fear. In both stories, the main character begins to question the world around him. He meets someone who shows him something different, something human, something dangerous. And in both stories, it doesn't end the way you'd hope. The system doesn't fall. The individual does. He's broken, rewritten, brought back into line. And that might be the most important similarity of all. Because these stories aren't about rebellion succeeding. They're about what happens when it doesn't. When the system holds. When the pressure is too much. And the individual gives in. Not predictions, patterns. The kind that we like to think belong to the past. So no, this isn't about one writer stealing from another. It's about something else. It's about how ideas move. How they survive. Even when the people who created them don't. So what do we call this? Influence? Inspiration? Or something else? Because the truth is, this isn't unique to George Orwell or Yevgeny Zamyatin. It's how creativity works. Every artist, every writer, every musician is building on something that came before them. In hip-hop, we don't hide that. We sample it. We flip it. We turn it into something new. But in other spaces, we call it originality. And maybe that's the real illusion. Because maybe originality isn't about creating something from nothing. Maybe it's about what you do with what came before you. Maybe it's about who hears it when it finally reaches the world. And maybe it's about who gets remembered when it does. Because 1984 became one of the most important books of the 20th century. And we almost disappeared. Same ideas, different outcomes. And that difference tells us more about the world than either books ever could. Backwards can still lead forward, towards the truth. If you're still here, thank you. It means the world to me that you'd stop what you're doing and enjoy these mini history lessons. I really enjoy researching and telling these stories, and I think it's important that they're not only told, but shared. That's where you can help. Tap that little share icon and spread the word. They didn't teach us these stories on purpose. This is the Underground Syllabus.